Ever since the Madoff fraud and all that went on in the city of New York with big companies and small companies, people have been concerned about where their money is and what they're going to do with it. We're going to talk about that next right here on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
Because we can't reinvent traffic, we reinvented how the driver navigates around it. You can learn more about this and other reinventions at lexus.com/allnewrx.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Thank you. I'm Henry Baskin. Today we're going to be talking on due process with a couple lawyers and a gentleman who are really well versed in the situation of the brokers and some of the fraud and some of the things that go on in space. Because someone mentioned to me at one time, did you ever see your stock certificates? I said, no, they must be out there in cyberspace. And I guess that's what it's come to. With us today is Tony Trogan on my far left. Anthony Trogan has been in securities law and stock broker fraud for several decades now.
Close to 30 years now, Henry.
And one of the experts, another expert here is Eric Michaels of the firm of Saretsky, Hart, Michaels, and Gould. And you similarly take opposing viewpoints with Tony, is that correct?
We do. Regularly taking opposing positions in cases, but there are areas where we agree as well. It just depends on the particular case and the facts involved in the case or the situation.
The key question for the average investor, when I say investor, the person who has a job and said, let's put some money with a company because it's silly to just put it in the bank, let's put it with a stockbroker. Do people really know what they're doing when they do that? Do they really understand the process?
No. In my experience, absolutely not. And it's my firm belief that everyone does not belong in the stock market.
Well,
some people belong in CDs and bank accounts.
Yeah, but when you go to a broker gives you, it's like a cafeteria. You can have a CD, you can have a treasury note, you can have stocks, you can have bonds and things such as that. But when someone comes to you and says, I have a municipal bond in Michigan, and you don't have to pay interest on what you earn on the bond, how safe are these people?
Well, I mean, typically a bond or a municipal bond is a safer product,
right? As
opposed to being 100%, for example, in the stock market or in investing in something that's a little bit more high risk. It just depends. I think that the most important thing above all else is what you want. And if you want safety, and you communicate that to your stockbroker, he should be able to give you that.
Well, I know, but is it all, Tony, is it all risk and reward? I mean, the higher the risk, the more the reward?
To a large extent, there is if you will, a market standard rate of return. And when you try to achieve a higher rate of return than that market standard, you incrementally incur greater risk.
Yeah, but do you know this when you talk to your broker? I don't mention brokers' names or companies, but when you talk to them, this is a person who has a fiduciary duty to you to do what's best for you. That person will say, yeah, I'll take the order, I'll buy that stock. It seems that no one holds up a red flag and says, well, I don't think you should do it. They just do it, or they'll sell a bond. The bond may be rated by Moody's, who have their own issues recently, but Moody's may say, oh, this is a AAA rated bond. And then 2 weeks later, it's a AA, and then it goes down to a B rating. So that means that it's not going to pay as well as you thought it would pay, or with any degree of certainty, I'm saying.
Obviously, stockbrokers can't predict the future. I think that what the important thing for them to do is present opportunities and explain your options, and then it's up to the consumer to be able to decide amongst those options what they want and what's best for them. Is there anything that's 100% certain? You have banks that are failing as well. So
every day.
even just money in the bank may be at risk. So there are differing levels of risk, and I think that it has to be a combination of both the customer and the broker making that appropriate determination.
Well, you go back to the years after the Great Depression, and you went to your banker and you trusted Mr. Banker. He gave you a loan for your business. Everything was normal, and you trusted this person. Now we've gotten to the point where there's so many buzzwords and acronyms in this business that I don't see how the normal person, an educated person, can understand what an SIV is and what these bond ratings mean and what the risks are.
I'm in total agreement with you. And that's why I firmly believe that everyone does not belong in the stock market. If you don't understand it, don't buy it.
But where do you put your money?
Well,
assuming you had money.
Sure. I agree. I mean, I agree with Tony. There are instances where it's not appropriate for someone to be in the stock market. Mm-hmm. It just depends on an individual's circumstance and what they want their money to do for them. If they want the money to just sit in the bank and they're comfortable with that and they're earning whatever their interest they're earning in a savings account, then that may be perfectly appropriate for them. But I think one of the responsibilities of a broker is to explain what a AAA bond means or whatever, or being invested in a stock or an equity means.
Well, take a simple one like a 401k. People have 401ks. Where do they put their money?
It depends on what they want.
I mean, right. I mean,
and for example, if you're talking about a younger person who is planning on contributing money to that 401k for several years and doesn't anticipate an immediate. Remember, I'm not a stockbroker. I'm defending brokers, and so this is what we kind of generally see, in handling these cases. If there's a younger person, then their needs are probably different than someone who is on the verge of retirement, and how their 401k is allocated at that time. So you're talking about a span of 40 or so years.
But what you're saying is trust your broker to give you good advice about how to maximize your goals, right?
Sure.
Okay, but Tony, does that broker give good advice on how to maximize goals, or is that broker in business for himself or his company?
There's an inherent conflict between the role of the broker as an advisor and the role of the broker as an income producer. And the good brokers understand that, and they're able to convey advice which is somewhat independent of their own self-interest. But it's your money.
Well, the reason I ask is that some lady who's, I think she's 80 years old, and she just found out that this annuity she had, she couldn't touch for another 20 years. And if she did, she was penalized 10%.
Sure.
But no one told her that years and years ago. Because if you pick it up, if you look at it, there's this fine print. And I've been railing against fine print forever because no one reads the fine print.
Sure. It's absolutely a broker's obligation to explain. For example, you're talking about a surrender charge on an annuity.
Right.
And it isn't. It is the broker's responsibility to explain what those surrender charges are. Absolutely. It's something that I deal with all the time, is whether that was accurately explained or not. But assuming that it is accurately explained, and in that instance, an 80-year-old woman, it probably wouldn't be appropriate to have her in a product that she can't get out of for 20 years.
She'll never live to see the end of it.
Right. But we have situations where 35-year-olds buy an annuity with a 5 or a 10-year surrender charge, which may be entirely appropriate for them. And they claim at the time when they buy the product and they sign all the appropriate forms that it's been explained to them, and then 2 years later their circumstances change, and then they complain that they can't get out.
Right.
But they knew it going in.
They knew it going in. You're right. I agree with you, but some of the fine points they don't know. I mean, I don't even get into the credit card business because that's one of the most difficult ones. But joining us is a gentleman named Pat Broderick. He's a president of something called Lifekeepers. I don't know if you know him, but we picked him up by remote. Pat, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Henry.
Okay, Pat, you've heard our conversation, presumably.
Yes.
Do you have a different view that, that either Tony or Michael have?
I do. I was a stockbroker for over 20 years.
I should say, Eric.
I think that the system is rigged against the investor. And in fact, today in Congress, there was a report that I read on Morningstar regarding the Investor Protection Act. A fellow out of Mississippi, Mercer Bullard, he's a law professor at the University of Mississippi, wrote an article on Morningstar called the Anti-Investor Protection Act. The idea behind the law was to raise the lower standard called suitability up to the higher standard, and a word you use called fiduciary. And the idea was to make brokers, specifically brokers who work for firms like Merrill Lynch, let's say, to go and raise their standards to a fiduciary level, which advisors must apply. And in fact,
so you say that advisors are different than brokers?
Yes, they are.
Tony, do you run into advisors?
Yes.
Do you find that all advisors are?
I don't see any
with
difference.
Halos around their heads?
No, I don't think there's much of a difference between the two.
We have some disagreement here, Pat.
What Congress is looking to do then is to actually lower the standard for everyone from a fiduciary standard down to a suitability standard. And that is really unfortunate.
But what would be the difference between you've had experience in this, between an advisor and a broker?
Sure. And I think that the distinction is whether the broker or the advisor has either a suitability obligation or a fiduciary obligation. And we're getting into some technical, legal...
Yeah, it's getting technical. But
and I'm not intending to get too technical, but essentially a broker on a suitability issue has to make sure that the product that they recommend is appropriate for that person on a per transaction basis. And when you're talking about a fiduciary responsibility, you're talking about when a broker takes on an entire portfolio, and there's different ways that can be done, but usually where you have that is in a managed money account where they're not being paid on a transaction per transaction basis. Rather, they're in charge of, and they've been given the responsibility for the entire account. Well, so there's a difference there. Yeah. It may be too technical. It may be too technical of a legal difference.
But I can see it. But these people that are on television, like Mr. Broderick is saying, well, you don't need brokers. And I'm thinking, well, okay, but you need someone to tell you what to do.
Well, I think you need brokers.
I mean, well, I know you do. but
Tony probably thinks you need brokers
do you need brokers?
I think that the need for a full-time, full-pay broker on your account is diminished over time as a result of two things. One, the level of sophistication that some people are able to achieve as a result of their experience and their study. And the other thing is the availability of markets and products as a result of the internet and discount brokerage services. There are certainly circumstances where the advice and the expertise of the broker are essential. There are many other routine circumstances and more mundane circumstances, especially for the conservative investor, where the broker is simply not necessary and an expensive appendage to the process.
Well, it's expensive, but how do you, look, we've had so much fraud, we have so much going on, and even in the state of Michigan, aside from banks closing, we have brokers who have pulled off, I don't even know they're brokers, they're money advisors or people like that who have pulled off Ponzi schemes, and people have lost millions of dollars. Let's assume that you're not lawyers, you're just regular consumers. How do you decide who to go to get advice on what to do with an inheritance that was given to you by your family?
Well, I think that you know, a broker that works at a that works at a respected, if you will, brokerage firm that has a reputation, and you've gotten recommendations and referrals to a particular person.
Right.
You know, when you're talking about a guy who is in a strip center with, you know, just a shingle up, and there's no, you know, it was referred by this guy or that guy, and you don't know anything about the person.
Mm-hmm.
It probably is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so in those instances, I wouldn't recommend that someone goes to see that person. But there are obviously, you know, places to go that have a strong reputation.
Well, I understand, but some of those places with strong reputations are out of business.
Henry, selecting a broker is one of the most difficult things that a person can do. And it is so difficult that, notwithstanding what I do for a living, I refuse to recommend brokers. And one of the most difficult things I had to do was to select a broker
For yourself.
for my mother-in-law.
Oh, well, I'm not sure you want to do that. Is Pat Broderick still with us? Or did we lose that feed? Here's a gentleman that says unequivocally, you don't need brokers, that you can manage your money with a reputable financial advisor. Right, Pat?
I agree. And in fact, the innovation through the internet is so good and so advanced that the planning tools that are available for free on sites, for example, like Vanguard, provide everything that an investor needs.
Well, let me ask you, is Vanguard under the auspices of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or the SEC or any of those organizations?
They are. There's different regulatory bodies, and that they are primarily a mutual fund company.
Don't they charge money?
I'm sorry?
Do they charge for their services?
Yeah, they do. The key thing that everyone must understand is that most costs that you pay are hidden in the price of the investments, so you never know what you're paying. How do we know what a price of gasoline is? Because there are signs in 4-foot-tall numbers on every street corner. They're exposed.
Well,
but when it comes to investment products, we don't know. They bury almost all the cost within the price of it, and you never know what it is that you actually lose to cost.
How would you know if you went online and went to one of these advisors?
Well, I suggest that you can avoid the advisors and avoid the brokers. But there are tools. The new regulatory body called FINRA, for example, has a cost calculator. So, for example, if you wanted to compare a mutual fund that your broker sold you,
Okay.
you can put in a corresponding much lower cost product, either an index fund from Vanguard or even one of their what is called an ETF, and compare, but most importantly, project into the future what the cost difference does.
All right, you're saying this is a program that you can buy,
It's for free. It's available for free online.
supplied by whom?
In this particular case, the cost calculator is supplied by a regulatory body that took,
Federal regulatory body?
yes, called FINRA, FINRA. It replaced both the NASD and the NYSE. They combined it into one. They're running a
Okay,
lot of commercials
well,
on
let
TV
me ask
now.
our lawyer, do you know about this?
Yes.
What do you think about it?
Again, I would agree at one level and disagree at another level. My mother-in-law could not have handled her own portfolio. Would have been impossible for her.
Right, she'd have to be online comparing.
She required the assistance of someone who could give her advice. And there are a great number of people. You remember her generation.
Right.
Younger people such as Eric have grown up, not just as a result of his profession, but he has grown up with the concept of securities investing. Older people like myself or yourself or yet the generation before us did not have that experience. And they, in addition, may lack the communication skills and the internet skills necessary to do what is being suggested. So they really do need some assistance.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here. I'll let you come back. And
Sure.
I want to ask you about some of the cases that you actually have handled and some of the results that you've obtained. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We're in due process.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
So we see what's happening. We're back on Due Process. Thank you. We're talking about insurance, about securities and stockbrokers, and whether to take the advice, go with it, and I'm sure that each of you gentlemen have had cases involving multi-million dollars, people who have invested, people who have been accused of improperly advising clients, right?
Sure.
Okay, Tony, tell me about one of your cases.
Henry, the one that sticks in my mind is a fairly recent one. It's fairly classic for the kind of practice I have, in that it was an 82-year-old gentleman, disabled, retired, and became involved with some very aggressive young brokers out of New York who had him loaded up in a high-energy account, the heavy use of margin, frequent trading.
What's a high-energy account? I mean,
a very active account, one that was very aggressive, one that was traded on a regular basis, a weekly, if not a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the gentleman's profile, you look at his limited resources, the fact that he's out of the job market, and in addition disabled and unable to do anything.
Right.
This kind of an account and the risk that went with it is just totally inappropriate. We use the word suitability. Does the investment account, do the recommendations fit like a suit?
Right.
If they don't, then the broker's not even supposed to suggest the investment. And
But
again, this is kind of a classic profile for my kind of client.
So what do? You bring suit against the broker?
We brought an arbitration claim.
Mm-hmm.
We're generally not permitted access to the court system because of contractual agreements that are signed when accounts are opened.
Do people know that?
Some do, most don't. It gets part of the form, the part that no one reads.
Can you take it out?
No.
No.
Impossible.
No, I mean, once you sign it, I understand, but before you sign it, can you negotiate those terms?
I don't think there's a single brokerage firm that would accept an account that has the arbitration agreement stricken.
So, Eric, you have a lot of work in arbitration forums.
Sure. Most of the cases that we handle are in
arbitration. Is that done so that it doesn't become public?
No, I don't think that it's done because in order to prevent it from becoming public. Essentially what FINRA does, which was, we had a reference to FINRA before,
right,
where most of the arbitrations are handled through, which is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And basically what they've set up is a self-regulated arbitration process whereby claims are brought and they're handled by a panel generally of 3 experienced arbitrators who are experienced in the securities
right,
industry. And it's handled through that outside of the court system. And there's reasons for it. It's generally more efficient. There's less
cost involved.
There's less cost involved.
Tell me about one of your cases.
Well, Tony was mentioning the case that was referencing a case that he was handling for this 82-year-old individual. Mm-hmm. A case that comes to mind is a case that just came into the office, whereby a relatively young man in his mid-50s purchased some variable annuity products, and variable annuities have gotten a bad reputation based on the expenses and some surrender charges that you mentioned before. And he's complaining about these variable annuities. However, when in speaking with the broker, he brought an arbitration claim in FINRA, and so we interviewed the broker and we said, hey, what's going on? Why is he making these complaints? He says, really, I don't know, because 5 years ago I sold him the exact same product. I sold him 3 variable annuities 5 years ago.
And everything was fine.
And everything was fine. He didn't have any problems with them at all. But now, because they suffered a little bit of value in the market, now he's complaining about them, whereas they performed before.
I can understand
and
that.
So,
Well, we have 30 seconds. I wonder if you could just give me a sentence of advice to investors.
be careful, it's your money.
If it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Okay, and that was the Madoff curse. I mean, it was too good to be true.
Sure, but I also think that that individuals need to take a little bit of their own personal responsibility and stay on top of things. Don't fall asleep at the wheel, for lack of a better term.
Okay. Hey, let me thank Pat Broderick for bringing some more perspective to this, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. We're supposed to come out what was it? I can't recall.
He was having some problems with it. I don't know. I think he made a catch, but I don't know.
I was watching the screen.
There was a.
Hey, Pat, you still there?
You said you're still on.
I'm still on. Oh,
Camera on this spot. That's probably.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
Because we can't reinvent traffic, we reinvented how the driver navigates around it. You can learn more about this and other reinventions at lexus.com/allnewrx.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.